The warming of the world's oceans is no longer a distant environmental concern. It is an unfolding crisis with profound implications for human health. The energy stored in the oceans over decades can be released suddenly, intensifying atmospheric heat, disrupting weather patterns, and triggering a cascade of health crises. Understanding the timeline of these impacts is essential for clinicians, public health planners, and communities because the effects unfold in layers, each wave of ocean-driven warming hitting populations in different ways, often compounding the damage from previous events. The warning is stark. The human cost is immediate, widespread, and likely to escalate without urgent mitigation and adaptation measures. In the short term, over days to months after a sudden ocean heat release, extreme heat events dominate the health landscape. Rapid atmospheric warming, sometimes amplified by marine heat waves, produces heat waves inland and along coasts that can overwhelm human thermoregulation. Hospitals and emergency services experience surges in admissions for heat stroke, dehydration, cardiovascular strain, acute kidney injury, and respiratory exacerbations. Vulnerable populations, elderly residents, children, outdoor laborers, those with chronic illnesses, and people without reliable access to cooling face disproportionate risk. Even healthy adults engaged in physical activity can suffer heat-related illness when temperatures rise beyond human tolerance. Clinics may struggle to maintain essential services as power outages, water shortages, and staff fatigue combine with increased patient loads. The immediate health consequences are visible, acute, and often life-threatening, leaving little margin for error in response. Simultaneously, short-term disruptions to food and water systems emerge. Warmer ocean surfaces alter rainfall and river flow, reduce crop yields, and disrupt fisheries. Coastal and low-income communities dependent on seafood face sudden reductions in protein intake, while inland agricultural regions may experience drought or flooding that compromises staple crops. Food prices rise quickly in response to these shortages, creating nutritional stress and forcing households to reduce dietary diversity. Children, pregnant women, and chronically ill individuals experience early micronutrient deficiencies, heightening susceptibility to infection and compounding the immediate morbidity from heat-related illness. Water systems are also stressed. Drought, evaporation, or contamination from floods promotes waterborne diseases such as cholera, diarrheal illnesses, and Vibrio infections, adding another layer of health risk within weeks of a warming event. Over the medium term, spanning months to a few years, the compounded effects of repeated ocean heat-driven events begin to accumulate. Populations exposed to multiple heat waves and extreme weather events experience chronic health strain. Cardiovascular and renal disease prevalence rises as repeated dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, and heat stress wear down organ function. Mental health burdens intensify. Anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, and burnout among both patients and healthcare workers become pervasive, eroding resilience and community cohesion. Recurrent nutritional stress, stemming from disrupted food systems and reduced access to protein and micronutrients, produces long-term effects such as stunted growth in children, impaired cognitive development, and weakened immune function. Hospitals and public health systems, already strained by short-term crises, face escalating patient loads with limited resources, creating a vicious cycle where vulnerability compounds with each successive extreme heat event. During this medium-term period, social inequities are magnified. Low-income households, marginalized communities, and residents in informal settlements bear the brunt of these impacts. They often lack access to cooling, clean water, and adequate nutrition, leaving them disproportionately exposed. Communities reliant on outdoor labor or subsistence agriculture face repeated economic shocks, deepening poverty while simultaneously increasing health risks. Even in wealthier nations, urban heat islands exacerbate exposure for the socially vulnerable, creating clusters of preventable illness and mortality. The failure to integrate social vulnerability into climate health planning ensures that medium-term health consequences are both persistent and unevenly distributed, exacerbating inequality and eroding social cohesion. In the long term, spanning decades, the impacts of ocean warming can become structural and enduring. Rising seas, altered marine ecosystems, and shifting atmospheric patterns threaten food security on a global scale. Chronic malnutrition, protein deficiencies, and vitamin shortages become widespread, particularly in regions dependent on coastal fisheries and climate-sensitive agriculture. Vector-borne diseases, including malaria, dengue, and other mosquito or waterborne pathogens, expand their ranges into previously temperate regions, creating persistent public health challenges. Health systems struggle not only with acute episodes, but also with a growing baseline of climate-driven disease, requiring sustained investment in infrastructure, personnel, and emergency capacity. Long-term psychological and social effects are equally concerning. Communities repeatedly exposed to extreme heat, storm surges, and food insecurity experience persistent stress and trauma, which can erode mental health and social trust over generations. Migration pressures increase as people are forced to leave regions affected by repeated climate shocks, straining urban centers and healthcare systems elsewhere. Economically, ocean heat drives productivity losses, labor shortages, and escalating healthcare costs, creating feedback loops that further undermine human well-being and resilience. Without aggressive climate mitigation, these long-term consequences will continue to escalate, embedding vulnerability into populations and leaving future generations exposed to compounded risk. The timeline of ocean heat impacts demonstrates that the threat is both immediate and cumulative. Short-term crises bring visible suffering and hospital surges, medium-term consequences erode physical and social resilience, and long-term effects threaten to restructure population health and societal stability. Vulnerable populations, children, the elderly, the chronically ill, low-income households, and coastal communities bear the heaviest burden, while health systems and social safety nets are progressively stressed beyond capacity. The warning is unambiguous. Each degree of ocean warming increases the frequency, intensity, and unpredictability of these health crises. Without coordinated global action, integration of climate science into health planning, and proactive investment in adaptive infrastructure, the unfolding sequence of ocean-driven health impacts will translate into avoidable suffering, systemic strain, and preventable deaths on a scale unprecedented in modern human history. This timeline underscores the urgency for clinicians, public health authorities, and policymakers. Ocean heat is not an abstract environmental metric. It is a direct and escalating threat to human health across every timescale. Early action, preparation, and global mitigation are the only ways to break this cascade before short-term emergencies transform into long-term, systemic crises.